Hi, everybody. This is Imran Ahmed, founder and CEO and editor-in-chief of the Business of Fashion. I'm here in London at our headquarters, and I am joined today by our chief correspondent in New York, who's actually, I believe, in Los Angeles today, Lauren Sherman. And we are here to talk about the end of ownership in our first BOF Professional Live event. We're really grateful to the folks at shindig.com for helping us to host this event using their technology today. And one of the reasons we decided to use Shindig was so that we could see all of your faces and so that we could interact with all of you as if we were in a room together. But I noticed that many of you have switched off your cameras, which is a real shame because there are BOF professionals joining us from all over the world. I think we had more than 6 VPs for this conversation. And later in the conversation, we will be taking questions from all of you to ask of Lauren and me about the end of ownership, which is the topic for this conversation. But we won't be able to do that unless you turn your cameras on. So if you do have questions for us that you would like us to answer, we would encourage you to turn on your cameras, share your faces with the rest of the BOF professionals that are joining us from all over the world so that we can be part of a global conversation. Just a few housekeeping notes before we start. If you'd like to send us a question at the end of the conversation, click the speech bubble in the bottom toolbar and send these to our team during the broadcast. And what we'll do is we'll call out your name later on, once Lauren and I have had our initial conversation, to invite you to ask your question. At times, we may ask polls of the audience in order to gauge your opinion on a specific topic. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to ask you to raise your hand. So if you look at the icon in the bottom toolbox that has the hand on it, you can raise your hand if you agree with the question that we're asking. You can also see, as I mentioned earlier, which of your fellow BOF professionals are in the room with you. If you'd like to interact with each other, you can click on the participants icon on the toolbar, which will enable you to send an instant message or video chat to other BOF professionals who are attending today. For any support questions, if you're having challenges with the technology, representative in the audience, so search support, and they're here to help you out. You can search support in the participant tab and message them for further assistance. And finally, before we begin the main conversation, I just wanted to thank you all for being BOF professionals. BOF professionals is our global membership community, and all of you who are joining us today are privy to this exclusive conversation because you are one of our valued members. So with all of the introductory comments aside, I wanted to welcome again, Chief Correspondent Lauren Sherman, and we'll together be taking a deep dive into a fascinating piece of analysis that Lauren recently wrote called The End of Ownership. So Lauren, I just wanted to start, first of all, I think everyone will have read your article, but can you just summarize for me in a nutshell what the end of ownership means? What are you getting at when you tried to explore this topic for us on BOF? Lauren, I just wanted to see what was your initial thinking when you came to explore this piece for BOF on the end of ownership, and what does that mean exactly?
I think you're asking how I came to decide to write about this piece, and really it came out of this conference I went to where the executives from Rent the Runway, executives from The Real, and a couple other rental and resale sites were speaking, and it made me think, we share so much. Today I'm in a breather space, which is you share office space. So I'm renting this for a couple of hours, and we share so much. We do Airbnb, we do Uber, and in fashion, it's taken a bit longer for that to happen. And so I just talked to as many smart people as I could about why why that is, and if we ever will get to a point when we don't own any clothes or any bags or what have you.
And I'm just curious, I can understand why someone might not want to own a car if they live in a big city like London or New York, and, Uber and Juno and, Lyft and all of these ride sharing services are ubiquitous. And I can understand, people don't own houses in every city they visit, and they might not want to stay at a hotel, so they might want to stay in a home. So, but why would, in your research, what did you uncover about why people might not want to own clothes?
Well, one thing is that the spaces they live in are getting much smaller. And then the other thing is they have so much stuff. I think for years we've been buying and buying and buying. And, even if you don't shop a lot of fast fashion, I don't know one person, no matter what income they make or what have you, that doesn't have a closet so full. And I think people are kind of, they don't have any place to put it anymore. And people are moving into smaller places. And so the idea of, I don't know if you remember this website, I'm sure you do, called Bag Bar or Steal, that came up in like the mid 2000s. And back then, I remember it felt very weird that they were renting Chanel bags or what have you. But now, the world has changed, and we don't own a ton of CDs and display them on our shelves. We own fewer books. Everything that was physical can now be digital. And so while there aren't any digital clothes yet, I just think people's mind shifts have changed, and you don't want to necessarily have so many things. They have less meaning than they used to, I think.
When I talk to people about this as well, the other thing that they raise is that actually, women, particularly very wealthy women, they in the past would have bought, a dress for a special event that they were attending. And then they found that they weren't ever having the opportunity to wear the dress again. And then on top of that, because people who attend these events tend to be photographed for Instagram, for their own Instagram feeds, or for their friends' Instagram feeds, or the Instagram of a wedding or special occasion that they attend, the dress is out there in the public. So in the past, you could wear it to one special event here and one special event there. But now, once you wear the dress, you've already worn it. And so people started collecting all of these things in their closets that, they want to wear something special and new. Like, have you heard that as well? And what's your take on that?
Yeah, I certainly have. And I think it's also happening with things that people wear every week. So much right now is made for Instagram. So if you buy, even a $150 dress and you post it on your Instagram account, you might not want to do that again. Or if even a $75 or $25 dress if you're in high school or something. And so there is this sense of you need constant newness, and as a result, people's closets are turning over more quickly, I think.
Right. And to what extent do you think sustainability or kind of idea of like creating waste has played a role in the kind of growing acceptance or adoption of the kind of idea of just renting things as opposed to owning them, particularly as it pertains to clothing?
I do think it matters to a certain group of consumers, and people in the fashion world often look to the food world as an example of where we would move. 20 years ago, not everyone was buying organic or what have you, but I think in general, it's not the top of mind thing for the consumer. There have been, Patagonia has a great circular program. Eileen Fisher has done a lot with circularity. I think a lot of the more high street brands are going to feed into that. And there's definitely a sense of you don't want as much to be as wasteful, but whether or not that's the driver, I'm not sure. I think it's important, and if it's important to the core of your brand, then great. But I think what's really driving this is that need for newness and the physical inability to keep everything that you once owned because there's just so much of it.
Sure. Okay, so now we've understand a few of the drivers about why this might be happening, but can you tell us a bit about the key players that are operating in this space? I mean, you mentioned a couple of them earlier, like Rent the Runway and The Real Real, but like how would you kind of categorize and divide the key players that are kind of innovating in this space around the end of ownership?
So there are the traditional rentals. So Rent the Runway, there's Amarium, that's a newer one that's a little bit more high end. There is Gwenny B, which is rental for plus size. That's traditional rental. You can have a subscription service where, I think Rent the Runway charges $159 a month and you get a bunch of pieces you can swipe in and out. Then there are the resellers, which if you look at it one way, it's almost long-term rental. So if you talk to the resale sites, what they say is a lot of the people buying from there are reselling those items a few months or a year later. And then there's the peer-to-peer element. And that's a little bit more nascent, I'd say. I think it's still a bit of a challenge for people to rent out their own items, but there's a lot of them are localized. I know there's a peer-to-peer rental site in Chicago. There's one in New York called Village Lux. There are a few that have come in and out. I was reading up on one called Curtsy, which I think has actually pivoted into more of a Poshmark model, buying and selling resale type things. So I'd say those are the three buckets of where this market currently lives. And there's a stat in my story. If you look at the size of this market by 2023, I think it's going to be $2 billion. And it's just such a small fraction of the overall fashion business that there's a lot of opportunity. They just need to see what the appetite is and also which brands are willing to come on board and adopt it. There are also startups now that are single brand startups that are starting out with this model. So there's an LA-based t-shirt brand called 4 Days, and they have a subscription model where I think you pay 10 or 12 bucks a month. You get 3 t-shirts. You can exchange them anytime you want, and they get upcycled, or you can keep them forever, but you pay 12 bucks a month, and you have to kind of reconcile that. So it's still nascent overall, and Rent the Runway is obviously the biggest player, but there are a bunch of different kind of sub-models within this model.
So as you think about the two or three really big players in the space, I mean, I think about Rent the Runway and The Real Real and maybe Vestiaire Collective in Europe. Yeah. There's a lot of action happening with those businesses right now. Can you bring us up to speed on the kind of developments happening at Rent the Runway and these kind of, as you call them, reseller sites?
So Rent the Runway just took out a $200 million loan from Temasek, sorry if I mispronounced that, the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, to fuel their subscription service. So as everyone knows, they started out as more formal wear for prom or for, I know that one of their biggest days ever was the 2012 presidential inauguration. So it was very formal driven. And in the last few years, Rent the Runway has really pushed towards day wear. And so they are now, their subscription service is just going gangbusters, and they needed to fuel that, so they've raised more money. I've talked to people who have friends who will rent something at their house in New York, go on a business trip to San Francisco, and leave it in San Francisco. And so I think those types of young professionals or just professionals are really using this service in a way that we haven't seen before. And The Real Real just raised a significant amount of money. They all are trying to drive growth in the market. There's clearly demand, but they need the product to do that. And so Rent the Runway needs to make relationships with big brands so they can place big orders on in-season product. And The Real Real needs to acquire secondhand goods that people actually want. So the only way to do that is with capital.
Right. So you pointed out one of the big kind of questions I think a lot of people have, which is like how are these businesses going to scale if the brands aren't cooperating with them, or if the resellers have a hard time accessing a growing amount of product? How much progress? Let's do the rental sites first. Like, how much progress are they making at convincing brands that this is actually a legitimate new channel? Because we all know it took a long time for these brands to get on board with e-commerce, and that was a big journey, you know, back in the time when Net-a-Porter launched. And some of them are only coming on board now, and like Net-a-Porter launched like, I don't know, almost 20 years ago now. What progress do you see happening on the brand front as it pertains to a company like Rent the Runway?
Well, I don't think you're going to see a Chanel bag on Rent the Runway in partnership with Chanel anytime soon. But I do think more and more brands are understanding the value of rental services. With resale, it's already happening. I think Kering has been pretty, I don't want to say vocal, but they've been open about the fact that they are open to rental. They're open to resale services, and that's the first step. With rental, one thing that a lot of higher end brands do is they'll give their older season products, so last season or 4 seasons ago, to these sites to sell or to rent. And then that way, I think the idea is, say you're, you know, Jason Wu or what have you, and you have a $4,000 formal dress that you were never able to sell that's 3 years old. If you put it on Rent the Runway or Armorium, you know, you can make some money off of it, but also introduce it to a new customer that perhaps wouldn't have been able to afford a dress for $4,000, but in 4 or 5 years will. So I think that many of them are seeing it as a window into a new customer. I think where it gets tricky is whether or not you give them in-season merchandise. And I think that Rent the Runway and its competitors will push for that increasingly as brands are sort of constricted by the wholesale channel, and wholesale becomes tougher and tougher to make money on. I think they'll be more and more open to working with reseller rental sites like Rent the Runway. And if you look, Neiman Marcus partnered with Rent the Runway. They have some Rent the Runway pop-ups within their stores. So they clearly understand that this is, you know, can be a conversion tool as well. I think it has taken time. In the beginning, a lot of brands signed up and then they pulled back, and I see them returning again because they are starting to understand the value of rental.
So I wanted to do a very quick poll of our, BOF professionals that have logged in based on what Lauren has set out here as the potential business model and evolution of the end of ownership going forward. How many of you, so we have 150 odd people watching live right now. I'd be curious to hear how many of you of the 150 believe that this will be a viable long-term business model, the rental model for the fashion industry going forward. If you believe it's going to be a viable model, please click the raise your hand icon in the bottom toolbar, and let's just get a sense of how many of you actually believe that this will be something that, you know, the industry needs to contend with.
Am I allowed to vote?
You're allowed to vote. I think I should be allowed to vote too, but our votes count the same as everyone else. So far, about 45 of you, 52 now, it's growing, 57, 60. So, you know, about at least a third of you believe that this is, you know, this is a viable, the rental model is a viable model for the fashion industry. Let me ask the question the other way now, which is, how many of you believe that there's no chance that this is a scalable business model, that, you know, companies like Rent the Runway will only grow to a certain level, but actually over the long term, consumers still want to own things. They want to buy them, and they want to put them in their closet and want to have them because they feel like, you know, part of the value of the product is having an ownership of it. So let's do that again. If you believe that this is not a viable business model going forward, please click the raise your hand button now. The team is tabulating the results. So far, you know, less than 25 of you don't believe it's a viable model. So that's quite interesting. So it seems like there's a bunch of people who've decided not to weigh in. But of those of you who have voted, most of you believe that this is a long-term viable business model for fashion. So Lauren, let's talk a bit about the things that might get in the way. We've already talked about the issues around getting the cooperation of the brands. But if this kind of new approach to kind of consuming fashion is going to scale, what are the other challenges that these startups are going to have to overcome in order for it to properly grow and gain more and more adoption?
Well, for one thing, it costs a lot of money to upkeep these products. So, you know, with a dress, you probably get a couple seasons, maybe one season out of it, but you have to clean it so many times, and the back and forth of shipping it and sending it and all of the logistics involved, and that all costs a lot of money. So when I
think Rent the Runway, last time I saw Jennifer Hyman, the founder, she told me Rent the Runway is the biggest dry cleaner in the United States.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. I fact checked that with them for this story, and so that's a lot. Even if you're doing it in a really eco-friendly and responsible way, it's just a lot of energy putting into it and a lot of money. So I think that's a huge thing, just figuring out what the margin is on this, because it's different. You essentially probably get more money out of one garment than a retailer would, but you have fewer garments, and you also have to put so much effort into getting that garment to the person that I think that it's difficult to. There's a reason all these companies keep raising money to fuel their business. It's because they need capital still. It's not like they can, perhaps if they were smaller and didn't want to grow as quickly, they could be profitable, but it costs a lot of money to scale this. And because it hasn't really been done before, there are a lot of steps and steps back that have to take place in order to fine tune it. I think that's a huge issue. And I think another big issue is, you know, especially with higher end garments, people do have a sentimental feeling about the products they own, and they tend to put a lot of mythology and feeling around high-end goods, their emotional purchases. And while I think, you know, consumer mindsets are shifting, I do think that we can't forget about the emotional aspect of this. And the highest end brands will continue to drive that. They will say it's emotion driven until they can figure out a business model where it makes sense for them to rent things exclusively or predominantly. They're going to keep driving this idea that, you know, a luxury purchase is an emotional purchase.
Are any of the rental, you know, startups out there, Rent the Runway and others included, as far as you know, are they profitable yet? Are they making money?
Essentially, if you talk to any of them, they'll say that they could be profitable, but they keep putting their money back into the business. I think that at some point that Rent the Runway may have been or is. I don't want to be quoted on that. But you know, they just raised another $200 million. So have $200 million lying around to fuel this. So I think the same thing with the Real. There are a lot of smaller resale sites that are profitable, because it's a great business. But once you are chasing scale, it just becomes a different business.
Do you think, if you look at the internet landscape out there, do you think that the ultimate conclusion for this rental space in fashion is that there's going to be a big dominant player or a few big dominant players? Or do you feel like this is going to be something that's going to be more localized just by virtue of the fact that, I've seen that we have people joining us from Brazil and from Mexico and from the UK, and like this doesn't really scale internationally. It's almost like you need local or regional players in order for the shipments back and forth and all of that to work. Does that ring true with you?
Yes, certainly, especially as I mentioned in the peer-to-peer sector, it just doesn't make sense. And I also think, just like there's Net-a-Porter and there's Matches and there is Farfetch and The Line, there are different types of multi-brand retailers online for different consumers. It will be the same thing here. Not everyone is the Rent the Runway customer. Not everyone is, the real customer even. And so you can't be everything to everyone. And so I do think while there will be dominant players, there will, in regions in particular, there's room for more here. And you see it. There's a rental site called Vivrel, I believe it's pronounced, launching here in the U.S., and that's going to be really focused on high-end accessories and jewelry. And so, there are a few of those already, but obviously the people who are starting this believe there's room for another point of view. And so I do think there will be multiple winners. I don't think it's going to be just, two sites that we're relying on everything for. It's not going to be an Amazon situation in this space. And I also think that you may see some of the bigger fashion and luxury companies investing more in this space and maybe even trying to build their own.
Yeah.
I mean, you never know.
Let's move on to the resale sites for a minute, because I just wanted to take a deeper dive there. And once again, community of BO professionals, I thought the way to ask this question is, how many people have used a resale site, whether that be a fashion related one like Vestiaire Collective or the Real, or even eBay or another, platform to sell used fashion and apparel and accessories items. So if you have actually participated in this economy around reselling, either by selling something on the platforms or buying something on the platforms, click the raise your hand button now so we can get a sense of we're all consumers in this community as well. Like, how many people have sold things or bought things on these platforms? And so we're waiting for the results to tabulate. And the votes are coming in. Already more than 50 people, right? So that's that's about a third of the people who are logged in right now. 53. That's a very significant group. It seems to me, Lauren, that this is a very interesting opportunity in terms of scale, because as consumers get more and more stuff, and they either decide to downsize or they need to downsize in order to keep, accommodating the existing things they have as well as new things that they're purchasing, that this becomes a very important service for people who have things that they don't want to throw away. I know I just recently moved apartments, and so when I was moving, I found all this stuff that it was really nice stuff, or stuff that, was still in good condition that I just didn't have a use for anymore. So, I used one of the platforms to sell it off to the next person who had found a use for it. What is your thought about how this resale market's going to develop? Because you have, the Real in the US, which is growing super fast. As you noted, they just raised $115 million. Then you also have Vestiaire Collective here in Europe. How do you see this market evolving?
I do think that at the high end, the Real Vestiaire are the leaders. And I remember interviewing Julie, the CEO of the Real 5 or 6 years ago, and she said to me, we raise the most money and we will scale, and that will be important. And I think she was right. There were a lot of players back then, and the Real has kind of come out. They make it really easy to use the service. Same thing, Vestiaire. It's a little bit of a different model, but in Europe. And I think what you may see is one of the bigger companies acquiring one of those platforms at some point, a luxury conglomerate, or, another e-commerce company. I think that they will really continue to dominate the high end. What is the challenge for them is finding product. And, obviously there's a ton of product out there, but how many pairs of Gucci fur-lined loafers? That's probably a dated example, but 2 years ago, did people really want to sell? And that's what I think they probably are spending a lot of time thinking about, is how to recruit sellers and how to find the right product, because it's specific. People want what they want when they want it. And so how do you kind of come up with an algorithm that you can pinpoint where that product is, how to find it? And I think you'll also see them partnering more with brands. The Real did something really interesting with Stella McCartney, where I think if you sell a Stella McCartney piece to the Real, you get a $100 gift card to StellaMcCartney.com. And I think we'll see a lot more kind of partnerships like that, because it just drives more consumption, but at the same time, it's a little more responsible. I think on the lower end, you see companies like Poshmark, which is peer-to-peer reselling, and they do. I shouldn't say the lower end, because they sell everything from $5 t-shirts to $5,000 bags, but they have had a ton of success in building kind of new product businesses. Just as on eBay, you can buy t-shirts that are brand new, you can buy a lot of new product on Poshmark. So you'll see that as well, kind of being mixed in. But generally, I do think that these businesses have room to grow. The huge challenge is finding the right product to fill the website with.
The other challenge you hear about when it comes to these reselling sites, particularly at the higher end, is around authentication. So obviously, with the amount of counterfeit goods that are out there, I think I just read today that they found like a huge shipment of fake goods coming into the U.S. from China. How do companies like Real and Vestiaire Collective get around the authentication challenge to ensure that the goods they're selling are real?
Well, they employ a staff of authenticators that's all they do. A lot of times they come from auction houses and places like that. The other thing that's in their advantage is a lot of the luxury brands have taken steps to protect their product. So they have a specific number assigned to them. I don't think any of the luxury brands have gone so far as to put a chip in the products to be able to trace where they are, but I know that exists, and I think that is probably in the future. So you know where your product is traveling, and you can also ensure that it isn't, if you don't want it to be resold by a third party, you can be careful of that. But I think they've been really helped on that end. There's just a lot of ways to authenticate a handbag or a piece of jewelry. I think the place where it's a bigger challenge is with clothing. And there's an example a couple of months ago where a Tibby dress was labeled as a Prada dress, and someone had just sewn it in. And I think it's just a bigger challenge to even, sometimes you can't, if say they receive a sample or a product, a one-off product, you might not even be able to find an image of that online. So to authenticate clothing is more challenging.
Right. So just before we continue, I just wanted to let everyone know that I'm shortly going to go out to all of you watching around the world for questions. So if you have questions, make sure you let us know. Click this speech bubble in the bottom toolbar to send your questions straight to our team. And if we are interested in your question, we'll call on you. You'll have to turn on your camera to show us who you are so you can speak to fellow BOF professionals around the world. Lauren, just as we conclude the conversation, can you just paint your picture of how this end of ownership space is going to develop over the coming years? I know I'm asking you to be a bit of a fortune teller, but as you spent so much time talking to all of the key players in this really fastly developing space, like what happens from here? You have all these players, some key business models have emerged. What happens next?
I think we're going to see some new players come in that offer really compelling alternatives, maybe differentiated product. I think we're going to see more brands coming in with a rental service embedded in their business model. And if it's a really good product, people will jump on. And if they like the product, they like the service, I think they'll just get more used to it. As we've said, fashion is a harder, it's not going to have as quick of an adoption rate because of the fact that you have to wear clothes. You don't have to wear a CD. You don't have to wear a magazine. But it does make me think about the magazine industry. And 5 years ago, I've always believed digital was going to dominate, but I would have said, I think some magazines will exist in print monthly. Today, I'm not so sure if 5 years from now there will be any monthly print magazines. And I think more people in that industry are kind of owing up to that realization and accepting it. And I think in apparel and in luxury goods that it will take longer, but it will get to a point where we own fewer and fewer things, and maybe you subscribe to 2 rental services and you pay a monthly fee, one at the high end and one at the low end. I also think that the other avenue for all of this is customization. So if you are only going to own a couple of things, those things are going to be very specific to you. So the 2 opportunities are embed some sort of rental model into your business and make that viable and exciting for the customer. And then if you are creating product, the challenge is going to be to make the customer feel like it's really special for them. Beyond monograms, customization has been sort of a marketing thing for a really long time. I think it's going to get to a point now where it's a huge part of the business. So that's where I see the market going. You will own quite fewer things, but those things will be extremely specific to you.
Okay. So we are almost ready for our first question. And I just wanted to put it out there. I think we already have a few questions that have come through. So I'm going to start, if you have a question, once again, click on the question bubble in the bottom toolbar. We are eagerly anticipating your questions, and Lauren is here, our expert on this topic, to answer any question you have. I'm really excited because I was just scrolling through the people who are here, and we have people from like 25 countries around the world, from India, from Brazil, from Mexico, from Sweden, from Switzerland. So there's lots of you, and I'm sure there's questions that are really pertinent to your local markets, but also on a global level. So I'm going to go to our first question, and I'm just waiting for our team to give the question to me. We have Rachel Kibbe from the United States, and she is just coming on to the podium right now. So Rachel, welcome to the BOF Professional conversation about the end of ownership.
So I'm co-founder of Help See. We're the largest clothing collector in the Northeast. One of the things we're trying to do, we collect about 20 million pounds of clothes a year. And one of the things we're trying to do with clothing collection is change the industry and engage with the fashion industry. And so we're in conversations with a lot of companies, both resale and formal retail, the way retail has always worked, about getting clothing back into their hands for resale, because they're realizing it's a $40 billion opportunity that they're sort of missing out on by not reselling their own clothes. I'm wondering, just from your point of view and having talked to so many different companies, if you really think they have the dedication to try to get to work with the logistics side to get their own product back into their hands at scale rather than just one by one from consumers. Because to me, that's the hardest way to make a huge impact and really get the most amount of clothes. The most effective way would be to work with companies who collect the clothes and then resell them.
Lauren, did you catch that question?
I could only, it went in and out.
Okay, so basically, if I was going to summarize Rachel's questions, she's saying like as it pertains to kind of scaling the opportunity, wouldn't it be better for big companies and brands to work with clothing collectors who can collect the clothing at scale, as opposed to trying to collect it one by one from consumers? What do you think?
I think that some of them do that. I think they work with consignment shops and bigger groups or bigger sellers who have made this into their business. I think that is a huge part of. They also, a lot of brands will sell directly to these secondhand sites or to the rental sites in order to offload additional inventory. It's a different thing to do than going through the off-price channel. So I think that is happening.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel, for your question. Just out of interest, where are you tuning in from? Okay. So we're gonna move on. We had to cut Rachel off there. This is our first time doing this, so please bear with us. I really love this technology. It's really important for me to see the faces of our BOF professionals. Next up, we have a question from Elizabeth McGarry, who's also joining us from the United States. And she should be with us very shortly. Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
It says connecting, so we are waiting for it to connect. Lauren, did you have a question?
I was just going to ask our team if they can type the questions, because for some reason I'm having a little trouble with the third image. I can see you perfectly, Imran, thankfully, but with the third person.
Sure. Our team is going to summarize the questions in the text box as the question comes through. Elizabeth, I think we have you now. Hi. Hello, how are you? Please speak up and let us know what your question is.
All right. Cool. Yeah, I'm Elizabeth McGarry. I'm calling in from Boston, Massachusetts. I run a sportswear consulting business on creative direction, product strategy. This conversation is particularly interesting because I'm curious how this trend that we're seeing is going to impact the sportswear world. It seems a little bit more funky area to be sharing footwear and clothing. What I'm wondering is if I had a hard time raising my hand on either of the two questions that were posed earlier, because I'm wondering if this sharing economy is a symptom of less consumerism down the road. So I could see how this we'll have more players and we'll see it trickle its way into other markets, but what's the time frame of that, and what is it a symptom of on a greater, longer term scale?
So Lauren, I'm not sure if you heard the question from Elizabeth, but basically she said, how do you think the sharing economy principles apply to something like sportswear, which she called a bit more of a funky opportunity? And, what are your thoughts on that?
It's funny. I was just thinking about that the other day, something very close to the body and how that would be impossible. I think what the opportunity is in that market is biodegradable fabrics and things like that. So you don't feel as bad at kind of throwing things away. I'm not sure if you're ever going to rent a sports bra or a pair of leggings. But you never know. If these fabrics get so so kind of antimicrobial, then maybe it'll be possible and people will feel less weird about it. I think in the beginning, people thought renting a gown felt a little weird. So who knows how far we can go. I do think in athletic wear, that's a different challenge, and that market needs to be thinking more about how do we make things that aren't going to end up in a landfill or just at the bottom of someone's dresser drawer.
Do you feel like there's a segmentation between people's motivation?
What do you think about that, Imran?
Elizabeth's just asking a follow-up question, so I'm sorry you can't hear her, but I will translate it for you. So Elizabeth, go start again.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because I think the sharing economy could be a symptom of a few things. You touched earlier on people, maybe on the more luxury end, they only want to wear something once. They only want to be viewed even in a daytime outfit on Instagram one time, and then they're done with it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are more concerned about sustainability and consumerism as a whole. So do you see that there's a segmentation in the market for that? And are we just seeing a shift towards less consumerism, or is it actually about consumerism and just things being more disposable?
That is a really good question. So Lauren, I don't know if you heard it. I'm sorry the technology is not working for you, but basically Elizabeth says she sees two drivers for this kind of sharing economy in fashion. On the one end, it might be the Instagram example that we talked about, which is people want something different to wear on Instagram on a regular basis because everyone has this kind of personal brand or visuals that they're managing. On the other hand, there's this kind of decline in consumerism generally, which is like people are actually want to consume less. So they're motivated less by showing off a different visual. They're motivated more by consuming less and owning fewer things. And Elizabeth's asking, do you see a segmentation in that model? Do you see that startups playing in the space need to think about those two kinds of drivers and those two kinds of customers differently?
I think it's the same person. Because in the past, if you think about the person who buys a new shirt for every Friday night when they go out with their friends, that person in the past would just put it in their drawer and or in their closet and never wear it again. Now they want to turn things over because their closets are so full. I think the reason people want to own less, Marie Kondo aside, is because they have too much stuff. And so then the reason they have too much stuff is because they want new things all the time. So I think they go hand in hand. I do think there's a customer who wants to buy a few really, really nice things. And for luxury brands in particular, that's a customer that you should be trying to capture and engage. But I think what it comes down to is the reason for all of this is because no matter why, you have too many things in your closet. I don't know anyone who doesn't. And so I think the motivation of why you have too many things, that's, I don't know if that's as important as the fact that people they don't have room for it anymore.
So it sounds like it could be the same person who has too many things and also wants to manage their Instagram image. Thank you, Elizabeth McGarry, who joined us from the US. That was a really, really cool question. We have another question now coming through, and the team is just setting this up. It's Victoria Crow, who's joining us from here in the United Kingdom. And it says that she'll be joining us very shortly. There's a countdown happening. Hi, Victoria. Yes, we can hear you. Lauren, can you hear Victoria?
I can't, but I just saw her question pop up.
Okay. So, Victoria, why don't you share your question and then Lauren can answer it.
An eBay customer for 10 years, maybe. Do you think that, and I guess on the lower price point end of reselling, do you think things like eBay or even Depop recently maybe encourages higher consumption rates by people because they know that they don't have to hold on to it forever? And even extending it into luxury, things like handbags actually have a pretty strong resale value. So you can buy something, essentially turning it into maybe a longer term rental, and then resell it yourself and make some of that money back to purchase something else. So almost the ease of which it is to resell nowadays encourages being able to buy things more frequently because, as Lauren was mentioning, we all have too much stuff and just want newness all the time.
Lauren, what are your thoughts?
I couldn't hear all of it. It went in and out. But
yeah,
you were talking about.
The question was basically about the resale market at the lower level of the market, and is it actually encouraging more consumption?
I mean, that's a really good question, because the idea, and I think this is at any end of the market, if you know you can sell it, say you buy something for 20 pounds or $20 and you buy it on a Monday and you say, I'm going to wear it this week, and if I don't like it, I can flip it next week for $10 and kind of break down the cost per wear. Or maybe you wear it 5 times and you flip it for $10. I do think that's motivating people to spend and to buy things. If in the back of your head, you know, you can kind of get something out of it or sell it at some point if you want something. It's a really good point. I think it's one of the reasons a lot more of the high street retailers are offering these services where you can bring back your product, donate it, and you get 10% off, or you get a coupon, or you get $20 off, or you get a free pair of jeans, or what have you. So yeah, I think it could be spurring on more consumption.
Thank you, Victoria. We have time for one more question, and we're going to be joined shortly by Edwin Bodson, who has a question about subscription models. Edwin is also joining us from the United Kingdom, and it is just connecting to him now. So just wait a sec.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Edwin. Yes, I can hear you. Welcome to BOF Professional Live. Can you share your question with Lauren?
Of course. So I'm the managing director of a fashion brand of Alexa Chung, and I was wondering if they should themselves offer subscription models that would actually encourage a circular circuit themselves, or do you feel, because you said all the costs linked to these operations, that's the question is, can you channel, or do you feel that customers would need to have an aggregation of brands to actually make a subscription happen, basically?
Yeah, so the question, Lauren, in case you didn't hear it, was, should brands be building this functionality in-house, or should they be relying on one of these external platforms? And if they do build it in-house, is that really a profitable proposition? I guess it would depend on the scale of the business, but I'm curious to see what you think, Lauren.
Well, I think they should be at least experimenting with it. One analyst I spoke to for this story, and I've done quite a few stories on the resale market as well, said, what if Gucci had some sort of program where they resold their product within their store and kind of developed this certain section where it's, rent this product or sell this product with old inventory or past inventory that's still extremely popular. And I think, what high-end brands want more than anything is control. And if you can control the conversation, if you can control the flow of the product, and you can also make more money off of it, whether or not that's scalable is something that, I think you really would out a bunch of different models and come up with several different scenarios. And I think what we're going to see are new entrants, new brands come in with this model embedded already. And once they start to have success, the bigger players will adopt it as well. I think that, if you look at Rent the Runway, they're making very big orders now, orders that rival the orders from big department stores. And they buy differently. They buy fewer SKUs and they buy deeper, but they are a viable retail channel now. And so should a brand try to do that directly in the same way they have their own direct stores and e-commerce, I think it's a thing they should at least be exploring and thinking about. And the first step, I would say, are these partnerships.
Okay. Thank you, Edwin, for that question. And actually, that leaves us with very little time left in our first BOF Professional Live session. There were a few technical glitches, I know, but I thought that was really cool. Thank you, Lauren, for taking the time to share your learnings with us, to go deeper into an article that a lot of people were clearly very interested in based on the traffic and that it created on the website. I just wanted to dig on this BOF Professional Live. It's really cool to see all of your faces. Thank you to all of you who joined. I think it's really amazing to bring our community together. It's one of the things that I've always loved about BOF is that you're all over the world. And actually, this is a really cool way to see all of you everywhere you are. I think, I've seen people from pretty much every continent in the world. So that just goes to show how global the BOF professional community is. I also want to thank our team at BOF for setting this up. And one of the benefits of shindig.com is that actually this room is going to remain open for the rest of for another hour or so. So if you have interesting questions that you'd like to exchange on with each other, you can look who else has joined us and you can ask each other questions and have chats. If you have any comments on how this BOF Professional Live went or any other questions about BOF Professional, please email us at professional@businessofashion.com and someone from our team will get back to you very soon. And so with 1 hour up, I would just like to say thank you. Signing off from London, this is Imran Ahmed, founder and CEO of the Business of Fashion. Thank you for joining us, and I'm pretty sure that we'll do this again very soon. So thanks, everybody, and have a great day or evening or morning wherever you are in this wonderful world we all share. Bye.